Okay, Proverbs and money. Okay, we're in our series, Help for Daily Life, and Proverbs has a lot to say about money. And I listened to a lot of sermons over the last 2 or 3 weeks from other pastors about Proverbs and also about money and everything else. And I thought it was kind of funny, kind of unique, because not every single one of them, but most of them, I would say at least 2/3 of them, maybe more. I listened to about 7 or 8 different sermons. All started the sermon with, "I'm sorry." It's like, what? Now, they didn't say, "I'm sorry." They say, but with some of them, they say, "I apologize." Okay? And what it was one in particular said, hey, it seems like that in our world today, when we talk about churches, and that some people, one of the biggest gripes about church, and one of the biggest complaints about church is they always talk about money. So that's what these guys were apologizing to. And one woman preacher that I listened, apologizing to. They were saying, "Hey, apologize, we're talking about money." And I thought, that's so strange, that's so funny that they're apologizing for it. And then I realized something. I realized that we've been doing this almost 8 years, and I've never preached a sermon on money. You know that? 8 years. So the next 4 weeks, I'm going to catch up, okay? Yeah, the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about money. And we're going to base it out of Proverbs. We're going to look at some other scriptures, and we're going to talk about a wide range of different things. Listen to a few of these things that I picked up in the last couple of weeks. Now, some of these were some other sermons, and I have to admit to you, I did not research this to validate it. So these claims may be true or not, okay? One pastor talked about in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that 40% of the verses are related to money. I bet yet in 8 years I haven't spoke about money. He said, now in the non-red letters, if you read through your Gospels and you have an old traditional Bible, the words of Jesus are in red. He said in the non-red letters, 1 in every 10 verses is related to money. Another source said that roughly about 2,350 verses in the Bible concern money in one form or another, or wealth. Money, wealth. We're going to use those terms interchangeably today. Money, wealth, resources, those type of things. It says that's almost twice as many verses about faith and prayer combined. I've talked a lot about faith, talked a lot about prayer. So maybe I've done you a disservice by not talking a lot about money. Jesus himself had a lot to say about money. Nearly 15% of everything Jesus spoke was related to money and possessions. 16 out of his 38 parables dealt with the topic of money. And the only subject that Jesus taught more about than money was the kingdom of God. So even Jesus said this is important. Okay? So there's a question, and the question is why? Why is this? Why is it spoke about so much? Well, look at this. Scriptures are very clear about the inherent connection between a person's spiritual life, attitudes, actions concerning money and possessions. That came out of one of my commentaries, because you can tell I don't talk like that, okay? But they're very clear about the inherent connection. There is a connection to money to how we live our lives. Anybody want to argue that? Okay? How many took public transportation today? Oh, use money. Okay? How many drove yourself? I did. Oh, use money. Gas, spent gas, right? Vehicle, everything else. How many walked here this morning? Nobody walked here? Well, maybe we need to do a health series after this, okay? Not just joking. How many of you stopped at 7-Eleven and got something to drink, maybe a coffee or a tea or a snack or a tea egg or something like that? Hey, we use money all the time, right? So this is obvious. Yes, it's connected to our lives. It influences your lives. One of the pastors that I was listening to talked about money and marriage and said that in the U.S. in particular, because he was a pastor from the U.S., that in the U.S., the studies have shown that about 55% of all divorces are over the issue of money. Think about in your own life. Think about conflicts you've had. Think about disagreements you've had. Think about worries you've had. They're pretty much related to money. So money is a big thing. So Proverbs is got a lot to say about money. It addresses money in so many different ways, and there's a lot of things that we're going to learn in the next few weeks, and we're going to learn some things that you may have been surprised about, okay? There are things that some people think about money that aren't true and aren't actually in the Bible, but they are important, okay? And there are some things that's there. I want you to look at this. Look at this verse. This is Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9. Now, in Proverbs chapter 30, and remember when Solomon wrote Proverbs, most of the Proverbs were his. But he also collected proverbs from other people he thought were very wise sayings. And these are in chapter 30, there's 14 different little proverbs in there that are from a man named Agar. Now, theologians don't know if this is actually a person or maybe it's a group of people. It may be kind of like a group of wise men or something like that they all come from. There's even some speculation that this was Solomon himself, but for some reason he credited somebody else. And there's all kinds of ideas, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that Solomon said these ideas are important. So he puts this in there. Now, if you look at this, it says, there are two things I ask of you, O Lord. What's that sound like? Sounds like a prayer, doesn't it? Because it is a prayer, okay? He is praying. This is the only prayer that appears in the book of Proverbs. I thought that was kind of interesting. Only prayer. But he prays this. Two things I've asked of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. So the indication in that is, do not refuse me before I die, is that he just didn't pray this once. This is something he's praying over and over and over again. So what's he praying? Let's look at the next couple of verses. Okay? Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty or riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. If you don't remember anything else today, remember these two verses, because they are so important in our life. They're so important that what it does is it reminds us that we need to have proper perspective of money and wealth in our lives. And that's what we're going to investigate in these next 4 weeks. How to use it, how to save it, what God thinks about it. Will God, make you wealthy if you follow him? Because there's a lot of that teaching going on. We call that prosperity gospel. We're going to address those issues, and we're going to look at those things too, okay? In Proverbs itself, there's 31 chapters in Proverbs, as you know. There are over 130 references to money, finances, wealth, prosperity, those type of things. We're not going to go through all 130 verses, but we're going to go through a lot of Proverbs and a lot of the rest of Scripture. But for right now, here's what I want us to do. We're going to break down these two verses a little bit and talk about them a little bit. And then we're going to talk about some other verses in Timothy. And I just want to kind of give you an introduction, and I think this will be one of my shorter sermons. Some of you are like, oh, thank you, okay, because you had to work all day yesterday. This is your only day off, and you're here. And God says, well done. He says, I'll bless you for that. It's good that you're here. So we'll keep it as short as we possibly can. All right. He starts off and he prays, keep falsehood and lies from me. And basically what he's doing, he's praying for integrity, okay? He is praying for integrity. He acknowledges the fact that he cannot do it on his own. And when we talk about money, and we talk about using money, we talk about managing money, one of the things that we realize is no matter how many self-help books we read, no matter how many other things are there, we need help in managing our money. And the best help you're going to get is going to come from God. It's not from your spouse, it's not from your parents, it's not from a financial advisor or anything else. It's from God. For example, a financial advisor, if you're giving a lot of money to the church or to other charities and things like that, your financial advisor is going to say, what? Why are you giving so much? But God's not going to have that attitude, okay? In our families, there are in some of the discussions, and usually this came out of some other stuff and some other stuff I was looking at, but usually when we talk about marriages and we talk about relationships and the husband and wife, one of the things that happens is usually one is more free spending, the other is more saving, okay? And I can't tell you in our family who is more saving and who's more free spending, but I can tell you who worries about it more. Because I'm just like, oh, yeah, we need that, let's get it, okay? Nancy's kind of like, well, we have a future, okay? And sometimes I worry about our future. Do we have enough money when we retire? Are we going to be okay? And I said, yes, we got 2 boys, and they're smart, and they're going to make lots of money and take care of us, okay? Nancy doesn't think that's the greatest plan in the world. But we have that. And so when we talk about money, when we talk about integrity, he says, I'm praying for integrity because I can't do it myself. I want to be able to handle all of life correctly, but in particular, money. Look at the next part of it. Give me neither poverty or riches. Okay, remember he said we need to have a proper perspective on things. And he's already saying, hey, I don't want to be poor. Does anybody want to be poor? I met one person in my life that said they wanted to be poor, and I never did believe them, okay? They just like, I don't need anything. I just want to be, I just want to be poor. I want to give away everything I have. I'm going to, it's like, okay. I don't want to be that way. Does anybody want to be rich? I have to admit, some days I think about that. It'd be really nice to be rich, wouldn't it? Okay? But he's praying, and he's praying neither poor, neither rich. And he'll explain, as we read already in verse 9, and we're going to talk about a little bit that more today, because he's thinking about money and how to handle money and what money can do. But give me only my daily bread. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. See, he's saying, hey, what I'm praying for, God, right now, is I'm praying to be content with what you have given me. He wants to be content in what God has given him, because if he's content in what God has given him, then he won't be driven to make more money, to have more possessions, to have more things. If he's content in what God has given him, then he won't be tempted to steal from other people, to steal from God, to steal from his work, whatever it is. He won't be tempted to do that. And one of the things that we need to think about, one of the things that we need to look at is we look at the culture. And the culture at this time, during the time the Proverbs was written, all the way up to probably past Jesus' time, but during the time the New Testament was written too, in the book of Timothy, we're going to look later, part of the culture was this, that sometimes when you went to work for someone, you actually literally became a slave of that person. And some of you got, I can relate with that. Okay, my job, I'm a slave. Well, you would be a slave, and the thing about a slave is a slave doesn't have many rights. And one of the things that would happen was that you would get to working for a person, you get enslaved to them, you couldn't leave because it would be detrimental to your family. Okay? They would come after you, they would haul you back in, they would do different things. Look at the book of Philemon. What does Paul do? Onesimus had left. And Paul, he was a slave, and Paul pleaded to his master, free him. He's run away from you, but, forgive him and free him so that he can help me out. That's where slaves were, and that's where they were. So if you're a slave to someone, you're working to somebody, and maybe they promised to pay you, 100 NT a day. But when it comes to getting your pay, they give you 20 NT, or they give you 5 NT, or they just tell you, hey, there's some leftover grain over there that we didn't bag up. You can go have that and take it home. Well, you would have nothing. But there was kind of this idea and this culture that if there was something there and I could take it and it was needed for my family, I could take it home. I could use it. I've seen that in the U.S. growing up. I've seen that other places too. That idea and that thought. And he said, hey, if I'm content, If I'm not poor, then I won't be tempted to take those things that don't belong to me. Because what happens when we're poor, what happens when we're in need, and what happens when we think we need something, we begin to rationalize. And what rationalize does is rationalization is simply you convincing yourself that something is right when you really know it's wrong. I was in Cambodia several years ago, and there's poor country, very poor country, and I was talking with some people, and we were talking about the problem of stealing and theft and things like that. And one of the local pastors I was dealing with, and he was telling me, he said, you got to be really careful. And I was like, well, of course I got to be really careful. And he said, but here's the thing. He said, when people look at you, he said, you're obviously an American. I was like, well, okay, thank you. Okay. But he said, you're obviously an American. So everybody's perception here is that everybody in America has way more than they need. So if I take something from you, it's okay because you got more than you need. So he says, he said, Christian people, he said, that believe in Jesus, they're following God, just don't see it as a sin. They just see you have an abundance, and they're helping you share that abundance. That's rationalization when we do that. But when we're poor, we're like that. So he's saying, hey, this is my prayer. Help me have integrity in everything I do, and help me be content in everything I am. Then he gives the reasons why. He says, otherwise I may have too much and disown you. Okay? Do you know studies show that when there's a crisis, that's when church attendance goes up? If there's a national crisis? One of the most famous studies in the last 20 years was after 9/11 in the U.S. Church attendance on the next Sunday was like triple or quadruple what it normally is. It was higher than Easter that year. Crisis. We often turn to God when things aren't going well. And he said, hey, when things are going well, if I have too much, if I feel comfortable in my possessions, if I feel comfortable in my money, if I feel comfortable in where I am, then guess what? God, I'm going to start forgetting about you. So I don't want too much. So I may disown you. And I may say, who is the Lord? Or, just that thing we talked about, I may become poor and I may start stealing. I need this to survive, and so I will do this. And so therefore we dishonor the name of God that way. Basically when I looked at this, I said he is praying the thing that I've said so many times already, for a proper perspective of his finances, of his resources, of who he is and what he is. He's weak, he knows that. He knows God needs to help him. He's praying for God to help him. He doesn't ask God to remove it from him. He asked God to help him and to give him what he needed. Okay? So, proper perspective. Let's look at some verses, about 5 or 6 verses in Proverbs about a proper perspective. Here are some things that Proverbs says. Okay? So, our view of money, our wealth must be kept in proper perspective. Look at this verse, Proverbs chapter 15, verses 16. Now, if you notice, this is kind of a if-then verse, okay? It's antithetical. So Proverbs, he wrote in many different styles. Sometimes he would write 2 statements together that both are kind of positive statements or both are negative statements. In these particular verses, he gives one positive and then he gives a negative. So let's look at this. Better a little fear of the Lord with great wealth than great wealth with turmoil. So he said, hey, if you had to choose between the two, great wealth with turmoil, one of the other English translations says troubles, okay, confrontations, things like that. If you had to choose great wealth with no peace in your life, or if you had to choose little with peace in your life, which one is better? And he says, choosing the little is better, with fear of the Lord. Now, that's a key part of it. With fear of the Lord, with God with you. Because when God is with you, one of the things that happens, and some of you know this, some of you experience this, when God is with you, it doesn't really matter what's going on around you. It doesn't matter what you have, because you have a sense of peace. You have a sense of security because God is there. But if you're in turmoil, if you have great wealth, you're always worried about you don't have enough. You're always worried about somebody's going to take it away from you. You're always worried about other type of things, right? But if you don't have it, you don't have to worry about that. You can focus on God. So he says, hey, it's better to have a little than a lot. Now, I'm not going to talk about it much today, but I want you to understand this. It is okay to have a lot. For some of you, God says, I'm going to give you a lot because I know you will manage it well. I keep praying to God, God, I can be a good manager, okay? And some of you pray the same way, and that's okay. It's okay to pray that. But he's saying, hey, keep it in perspective. Look at the next verse, Proverbs 15:17, just a couple verses later. Better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fatted calf with hatred. A fatted calf. That was a special meal, saved for special occasions, saved for special people, special times. He said, hey, it is better not to have any meat at all. Now, some of you are like, yeah. Some of the rest of us, Stephan was still here. Stephan would be back there going, right? You need to have meat. But what's the key? With love. You ever had those family dinners where everybody's mad at each other? You ever had any family dinners like that? Yeah, I see Cheryl here shaking, okay? And those aren't too fun, are they? Does the food taste as good as it does when everybody's getting along well together? No. So keep it in proper perspective. Better a little with righteousness. We've talked about righteousness a lot in the last month. Then much gain or much wealth, much riches with injustice. Okay? Look at the next one. Better dry crust with a peace. So in other words, dry crust means you don't have very much food. Okay? You have very little. Better to have a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. Better a poor man whose walk is blameless than a rich man whose ways are perverse. Okay? Again, he's saying keep a perspective on it. And if you notice, this is Proverbs 28. The first ones were in Proverbs 15, and actually there's some earlier in Proverbs, there's some verses that we could have pulled out kind of similar to this. He spreads these all out through Proverbs because he keeps wanting to remind us to keep a proper perspective on our finances and who we are and what we're about and how we use it, how we use that wealth, okay? All right, so here's the thing. If wealth distracts you or causes you to live and not act in righteousness, then it's better not to have wealth. That's the perspective we need to have. Hard, it's difficult. We don't want to think about that, but that's where it should be. That's where we should be going and should be thinking about it. Now, I want to say this. No, actually, I don't want to say this yet. Okay, I'll say this later. But right now, as we look at it, as we look at these things, and we look what Proverbs says, I want us to move to some other verses in the Bible. Not because I don't think Proverbs addresses it well, but I just want to show you the importance of keeping our perspective on it. Now, we talked about earlier about the words of Jesus being in red. Now, normally I don't put the red up here on the screen, but I just thought, I'll do it this time, okay? But this is the verses of Jesus. This is his words in Matthew 6:21. Look what it says. Wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Okay? And I think one of the reasons that money is talked about so much, and one of the reasons that even in Proverbs is discussed so much, is because Solomon knows that God knows that money, that our resources, our wealth, is the greatest comparator for our heart to God. Now, some may argue some other things, and I think we can argue some other things as well too. Okay? But money is one of the greatest competitors. It's the thing that can get us off track the easiest. Okay? It's the thing that can make us mad the quickest. Have you ever been somewhere and you paid for something and they gave you change, but they shorted you on change? How did you feel when you figured that out? Some of you are like, some of you are like, right now because you're remembering that bad thought, okay? Yeah. Sometimes it causes us to act like we should not act. We talked about divorce rates in the U.S. and how money is a major issue there. Do you know money's always, in my experience as an adult and being in church and church leadership, money is always one of the issues. I've shared this with you before, but I was in a church in California in the late 1990s, and the church was growing, and actually it was a church about 300 to 400 people every Sunday morning. That particular year, we had 75 baptisms that year. Adults, youth, mainly, some children as well. 70, that's big, okay? That's a lot. The money in the church, highest it's ever been in the church history. But we had a group of people in the church that had been there a long time, and their eyes got like this. Now, their eyes didn't literally get like that. But they saw how good the money was. And there was a debt in the church. The church had built a building that they shouldn't have built about 20 years before that. And it was kind of a sore in these people's sides, these people's backsides, okay? It was a type of deal where the whole church voted about whether they want to build the buildings or not. It was a 51 to 49% vote to build the buildings, and they decided to build them anyway, with half the church not agreeing, half the church, I think only about a third of the church left from what I heard in the history of it. So it was a sore thing. So when they saw the money increase, guess what they decided to do? Because these people were still in control of the budget and finance team, the other teams that were related to money. They decided, oh, if we just cut out all the ministry expenses right now for 2 years, we can pay off that debt. So they did that, to pay off a debt. A bad decision made about money previously. Another bad decision on top of that, because what happens when you don't invest money into something? It dries up. That church, 350 people, I went back and visited it about 5 years after I left it. I left in 1999. I went back and visited. Guess how many people were in that church? I walked in 10 minutes early to church. I sat down and kind of looked like it did here, just a scattering of people. I kept waiting for people to come in, waiting for people to come in. There was a few people there that I knew, I greeted. I kept waiting for everybody else that I used to know that went to church. That Sunday morning, there were 65 people in church. And it was all because of money. There were many other things that happened too. So money is a big, big issue. And God says when you start focusing on the money, when you think about the money and that's all you think about, when money is your into, when money is everything that you can, your thoughts, your ideas, your decisions are all simply based on money, that's where your heart is. Your heart is not on God. So he cautions us, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. And so when we have proper perspective, we need to make wise decisions with money. We need to save money. We need to do all those things, but we need to go back and check. Is money guiding our decisions, or is God guiding our decisions? Where is my heart? Is my heart on living a righteous life for God, or is my heart for this or that, or other things as well? Look at this. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Now, I wanted to stop right there, because there's where a lot of pastors stop when they're reading this verse. For the love of money is all kinds of evil. Therefore, if you have lots of money, here, you need to give it here so I can take care of it for you, because it's going to cause you evil. Notice what it says. Remember, we're talking about proper perspective. It says what? The love of money. Does it say money is evil? No. The love of money. In other words, where's your treasure? Where's your heart? Okay? For love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And he's saying, hey, they let money become their treasure. That's where their heart was. They walked away from God. Maybe not intentionally, but they just found themselves there. Be careful on that. Have a proper perspective of money in your life. We're going to read more verses out of Timothy. We're going to skip down to verse 17. Command those who are rich. Okay, perspective. Here we go. In this present world, not to be arrogant or to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, which provides us richly with everything for our enjoyment. Okay? Now, notice what he said. He didn't say, command those who are rich to give away everything they have. One of the pastors that I listened to there's a church in Tennessee, and you guys remember, some of you remember Derek from a long time ago. Derek told me about his pastor preached a message on money and finance and said it was a good message. I should listen to it, so I listened to it. And he told a story about in his church, this pastor in his church, about there was a man that came to him and said, I need some advice, pastor. And he said, so he was listening to him. He said, the man said, at work, they're offering me a huge raise at work. And the pastor's like sitting there going, inside I'm going, oh, yay, good for him, And he said, then the man looked at him and says, but I'm thinking about turning the raise down. The pastor said his thoughts were like, what's wrong with this man? What's wrong? Why would he turn it down? And he said, then he started talking about, because he's so worried that if he accepts the raise and he gets that much more money, that he's so concerned, he's so worried that money will become the thing that takes over his life. And so he's thinking about rejecting the raise so he doesn't have the money, so he's not tempted with spending the money in wrong ways or those type of things. And the pastor said, he looked at him and said, you don't need to worry about that because we've got a building program going on. You can just take it all and put it into the building program, except that raise. Now, the point wasn't for him to put it into the building program. But the point was this. If you're a person who God has given you riches, God's entrusting that to you. Remember, what does Scripture say? Who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills? Is it you? No, it's God. God owns everything. Everything is his. And he said, I'm entrusting this to you. I want you to use it wisely. So maybe you take a little bit and you send it somewhere because people are starving and you buy food for them. Maybe you take a little bit of it and you see somebody in need. Maybe they have a health emergency or something like that. We've had that several times in this last 8 years. And you guys have stepped up. Maybe you take a little bit and you give it to pencil boxes or school supplies. You take a little bit and you put it into the tithe, those type of things. God says, I'm giving it to you for you to use, so use it wisely, okay? Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant or to put their hope in the wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God. When you put your hope in God, God will direct you on how to use your finances and how to use your resources. Then he says in verse 18, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. Pretty straightforward, right? Pretty easy. Verse 19, in this way they will lay up a treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so they may take hold of the life that is truly life. And what God is saying here in what Paul is writing, when he's writing to Timothy and he's writing to the believers that are reading this, he's saying, hey, look, wealth, finances, those type of things, there's nothing wrong with them. They're good. But when we trust in them, they are ultimately going to fail you, okay? They may not fail you while you're alive and breathing, but they're going to fail you the second you stop because they won't do you any more good. There's nothing that nobody can do anything to send it to you. Nobody can do anything to credit you for it. But while you're here, you can use it to lay yourself more treasures by using it the way God wants you to use it. So we keep a proper perspective on things. Keep a proper perspective on how we're using the money and what we're using it for. Then in verse 20 it says this. It says, Timothy, guard what's been entrusted to your care. When you guard something, what do? You pay close attention to it. And he's saying, hey, you got finances, you got all this wealth, protect it. Use it in a good way. I almost didn't put the rest of this verse in there, but I kept thinking about it, and I kept thinking about it, and I stuck it back in last night. I said, and it says this, turn away from godless chatter and the opposing ideas, what's falsely called knowledge, which some have professed, and in so doing so have wandered from the faith. Grace be with you. And I put it back in there because watched the Super Bowl this week, saw lots of commercials, American Super Bowl, saw lots of commercials on the Super Bowl, watched some other TV, saw some other commercials. What does society tell us? There's godless chatter. And you know, if you have this beauty cream, you'll be much more pretty. Hasn't helped, has it? Okay? If you eat this food, you'll be much more healthy. If you have this thing, you'll be much better. I especially love the car commercials because, you know, the car commercials, they get in, they close the doors of the car, and then all of a sudden it's peace and calm. But not only that, you start driving that car and you get the power and exhilaration out of the car. So life will be perfect if you have this one car. See, that's godless chatter. That's opposing ideas of what the Bible teaches about knowledge, about money. Because the one thing that we're going to learn is the Bible doesn't teach money is for you. The Bible teaches that God has given you money, given you resources to do his work to others. Very clear. So don't be trapped in that. Keep a perspective on it. Do I really need this? Now, I'm the type of person that sometimes it's bad for me to go like to Costco and places like that because I've learned to do this now, but sometimes you walk in Costco and they got a new thing, especially if it's electronics, and 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was really bad about this, new electronics, I'd be, ooh, I need that, okay? Now, I make myself wait at least 3 times, and then I will ask Nancy, can I get this? Nancy said I haven't asked her a lot lately because I've really figured out at Costco now if you wait 3 times, usually it's not there by the 3rd time, so you don't have to worry about it, okay? But we need to keep our perspective of, do I really need this thing? Is this something that will really make my life better? Now, there are some things that do, and some things we need, and it's okay to have those things. But keep the proper perspective on it. Look at this. Wealth has benefits. And it's a lot of what we're going to talk about in the next few weeks. Wealth is also very dangerous because of where it can lead us, specifically leading us away from God. So I want to read these verses one more time. Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9. Okay? So as we think about this, and this is the prayer that we need to pray ourselves. Okay? Basically, Lord, help me to keep a proper perspective on my wealth, on my resources. Help me not to be too poor. Help me not to be too rich. Help me be willing to share what I have so that I can honor you. So let's read this. I want you to read it together with me. Keep falsehood and lies away from me. Give me neither poverty or riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. Let's go to God in prayer. Father, we thank you